So here we have seen that organisms produce the young ones of their own kind. Whatever the reasons might be, they produce the young ones of their own kind, but the young ones are not identical to the parent. They are not exactly identical to the parent. But every organism produces the young ones of its own kind. Dog produces a dog, cat produces a cat, man produces a baby, but man cannot produce a dog, cat or rat. That means every organism produces the young one of its own kind, but it is not exactly identical. Now we are going to discuss about the reasons why they are not exactly identical. What are the reasons? Here the crucial part is the DNA. DNA is the deoxyribonucleic acid present inside the nucleus of a cell. This DNA is considered as the blueprint of our body design, which will decide the characteristic features of an organism. So while copying of this DNA in the process of reproduction, in the process of producing young ones, in this copying of DNA, there will be some variations, some changes. The copies of DNAs are not made exactly similar. That brings the variations, that brings the changes in the organisms of same kind, but some little variations. Let us see how it happens. And one more important point here we have to notice, organisms cannot produce exactly identical copies because reproduction, in the process of reproduction, two different organisms involve. If you take it as sexual reproduction, two organisms involve in the production of an young one. Two organisms. If it is sexual, two organisms. Male and female. So here, when these two produce an young one, so this young one, how this young one can be exactly identical to this or exactly identical to this? Because in the process of reproduction, two organisms involved in sexual reproduction, the DNAs of two organisms are mixed together to form a new DNA. A part of a DNA is contributed by the father, a part of the DNA is contributed by the mother. So both these DNAs are recombined, which is called DNA recombination, and the new DNA is formed here. So it is a new one. Of course, this part is the human DNA part, this is a human DNA part, that is why this is also a human. But there are some variations here. So that is the reason why some variations occur. But you may get it out in case of asexual reproduction, or if you see in case of plants, there is a plant, it is a bisexual, it is having male and female parts, same plant is having female reproductive part, and here the anther of the same plant. So self-pollination takes place. Here the pollination has taken place in the same plant. You may get the doubt, yes, it is the same plant, it is plant X. Now the DNA present in the anther, now the DNA present in the ovule, both are of same kind. Then the plant that comes, it should be exactly identical to the parent, because both the DNAs belong to the same plant. Here the young one, the young plant comes. So will this plant is exactly identical to the parent? The answer is no. Why? Here in case of sexual reproduction, as the new organism is acquired its DNA from father and mother, so definitely this is a different one. A new recombined DNA has formed here. But what is the case here? Here the DNA is same kind from the plant, same plant. But here the young one is not exactly identical. That means while the copying of DNA, there will be some errors. So the copying of DNA is not accurate in any of the living organism. There will be some changes happen while copying. So this organism, in this particular part, in the female reproductive system, one new cell is formed from the old cell by cell division. During this process, a DNA is made into two copies. One DNA becomes two DNA. So while copying, there will be some errors. And whatever the new DNA is prepared, the DNA is pushed out. with some cell apparatus. Sometimes this DNA, it may associate with the cell apparatus, sometimes it may not, the cell will die. So here, when a new cell is formed from an old cell, the DNA is not exactly copied. That is what. So it brings some changes. So in this way, some changes happen in the DNA. So whatever the organism it comes, it is not exactly identical, but it is similar. So here we have seen that at every stage, whenever there is reproduction, whenever there is a copying of new cell, production of new cell from the parent, there are some changes in the DNA which we are calling them as variations. Now let us see what are these variations. Are they really helpful for the organism or useless? The variations are very helpful for the organisms. How? How they are useful? So overall, in general, we discussed that variations are helpful for the process of evolution. Let us see how the variations are helpful for the organisms. Different organisms live in different places. If you take an ecosystem, if you take a pond ecosystem, in pond there are different levels. There are some organisms that live on the surface of the pond, some live in the top layer of the pond, some as a bottom feeders, some plants grow at the bottom, some plants float on that, some organisms live on the bunds of the pond, some trees grow here. So likewise, if you see an ecosystem, different organisms live at different places. Why do they choose a specific place? Which comforts their nutrition as well as their reproduction. If the organism is comfortably get its food and reproduce here, it will live here. If an organism is comfortable to get its food and reproduce here, it will live here. So the organisms, they live in the place of their comfort, that is their habitat, which provide everything for their maintenance, for their nutrition, for their growth and for their reproduction. They select such place as their habitat. So the habitat of an organism is that the place in which an organism gets everything to survive. So in an ecosystem, there are different places. Different organisms fill in different places called as a niche of the organism. So the organism is comfortably, happily living in a particular niche. It is living there happily. So the organism produces the young ones. If the young ones are exactly identical, if there are no variations, what happens? See, if this organism X, it produced organism Y, it produced organism Z. So the organisms, there is no change. Just think that there is no change in the characteristics or variations. If there are no variations, they are living in some niche, some place, environment. This X organism is living in a water which is of 30 degrees temperature. But when it comes to the next generation, the environmental factors may not stay in the same way. They may be changing. They are not under the control of organism. Because of global warming, the temperature is raised to 35. If this organism is exactly like its parent without any changes, will it survive at this temperature? Doubtful. The next copy also exactly identical to the parent X. The Z is also exactly identical to X. Here the temperature is 45 or 40. So the organism definitely it will die. That means it is not adjusted to the environment. It is not adapted to the environment, then it becomes extinct. If it happens, all the organisms extinct. So the environmental factors, the temperature, the climatic conditions, they vary, they change from time to time. If organisms are produced without any changes, without any variations, they cannot exist in the changing physical world, in the physical atmosphere. You see, the bacteria are living in that water, in the marshy places. They are living at particular temperature. So if the temperatures of that place are raising up, high temperatures, then bacteria will die. But among those bacteria, if some bacteria have developed some variations which help them to survive in higher temperature, they will live. The bacteria which cannot survive in high temperature, the bacteria which do not have variations that help to live in high temperature will exist. See, I will explain you here. There is a bacteria called A here. Here is a bacteria called B. It produced A1, its generation, it produced B1. Both are able to live at 30 degrees temperature climatic condition. This A produced A1, the A1 is having a variation which can live up to 40 degrees Celsius. The B produced B1, it has got some variation, but not the variation which helped to live in 40 degrees. Or it helped to produce, it produced a variation which helped B1 to live in 21 degrees. Suppose in the environment the temperature is raised here to 40 degrees, then A will get the opportunity to survive because it has got the variation to live in 40 degrees. B1, its variation is living in 20 degrees Celsius, it will die. So in the nature, some organisms will extinct. We are reading in the books, so and so bird is became extinct. So and so animal became extinct. So and so animal is not found now. It is in the red book. Why the animals are extinct? Why they are becoming extinct? Because the variations in them are not helping the organisms to cope up and live in the particular environment. That is the reason they become extinct. So variations are advantageous, help the organisms. That it doesn't mean that all variations help all organisms. The variations are naturally coming in the organisms. Sometimes for some of the organisms, some variations are helpful, advantageous. Sometimes it is disadvantageous and they disappear. They become extinct. So these variations, they form the basis for the process of evolution. Anyhow, the variations in us, we have lot of variations when we compare with our forefathers and their bodies and to our present, because the environment is changing, everything is changing, the outer atmosphere is changing, the composition of air is changing, the temperatures are changing, global warming. So the next generations, the new generations whichever are coming up, they will have some variations. Some of the variations may become advantageous and help the organisms to survive.